Hello and welcome to another episode of Found It, Fetched It. In this episode, we are going to be discussing why perfection has its flaws. Joining me for this episode are LWDG group experts Claire Denyer, Jemma Martin and Samantha Thorneycroft-Taylor. Ladies, we've all been inspired to have this conversation from one of our society members, a post they put up with us about this very topic. Let's start by talking about why so many handlers feel pressure to have this perfect dog.
We've said about many topics in the past, social media, I truly believe, has a massive part to play in why so many handlers feel they have to have perfection from their dogs. Because let's face it, a lot of the stuff on social media is always the best bits. Now, our group, we share our bloopers, we share the training mistakes, and we share how to fix them. But I don't think that's necessarily a very common thing. I think most of the time, what people will be viewing on social media will be maybe the third, fourth, fifth rep to strive for that perfection of that exercise, or the best bit, or they might cut off the bit at the beginning where the dog almost ran in and they had to correct their position before sending them. So I think social media, for me, is one of the biggest culprits in why handlers are really striving for perfection, believing that's what everyone else has got.
Yeah, I think you're right, Claire. Social media is massively to blame, especially when people are like putting up videos of their 6-month-old dog doing X, Y, and Z, and people are like, God, my 6-month-old dog doesn't even walk to heel yet. How is that being achieved? So yeah, I think hopefully we're going to talk today about how that can be detrimental to our training, and hopefully let people take the pressure off themselves and their dogs a bit. Sam?
Exactly that. And you touched on something there that I was wanting to bring up, which I think is comparison as well. And whether it comes about from social media or from a group class or from talking to your neighbour from down the street. But again, it's a massive thing in dog training, because their 6-month-old dog can do more than your 10-month-old dog can in certain areas of training. So you feel this immense pressure to catch up and overtake. And again, that can be detrimental to the overall progression of your training.
I'm going to throw a spanner into this. We had this, when people brought out DVDs before we had the internet, and everybody was like, would watch the DVD. And I know it wasn't as many of them, but we would all still be watching perfect dogs doing perfect things, even if it was an instructional video. I looked at some of the videos my father used to watch, and those dogs don't put a foot wrong, even when they're apparently training to do something. And before that, is if you went to a test or a trial, you would only ever see the polished end result. So do you think it's a case of, it's not just social media, it's like everything we're given to look at makes it look like the dog is perfect?
I think, yes, to a point, that's absolutely right. I think the main difference you get with dog training DVDs is you probably see more. You might get more of an explanation about what's about to happen and why. And although, yes, they were generally showing in the DVDs some good stuff, I think the problem with social media is you get such a short time frame to show something. So it's much more difficult to explain, this dog has been doing this for 6 months. And so this is 6 months into his training in this particular piece, and what we've done before this is X, Y, and Z, and now I'm going to show you that. So although you're still seeing pretty much a polished, finished look, there was a lot more explanation as to what was happening before that to get the dog to that point. Whereas on your social media clips, you've got less than a few minutes to show what you want to show. So it is literally this clip of this. And I think that's a little bit why I quite like using a before and an after clip. So maybe showing a little blooper and then a finished thing, because I think that's a little bit more realistic, but you just don't have the time. So I think although with the DVDs, yes, you got to see polished stuff, there was a bit more explanation that the dog had been doing it for X amount of time. Sam?
Yeah, and I think also it's a lot of it is because obviously each dog has their own individual, unique personality, their quirks, their flaws, and their strengths. And it doesn't matter whether you watch a short clip on social media or whether you watch a longer DVD or video or anything, YouTube on the internet. It is impossible to show a training video teaching a dog how to do a particular new skill whilst covering all possibilities of what might go wrong and how you would tweak it for this dog and this dog. Because let's face it, in order to teach a dog to do that particular skill or training behavior, you'd have to film and then watch like a 400-hour video in order to cover all eventualities.
Yeah, and this goes back to something we were talking about the other day about when we were talking about spaniels and their hunting styles and how people can get really despondent that their dogs aren't maybe doing what another spaniel's doing. So maybe one looks really flashy and it hunts beautifully with its nose down and whips around, whereas the other is slightly, let's say, more methodical about their hunting, and they don't go so rapidly, but they do cover the ground and they do the job. It's really hard because that person without possible guidance might go, my dog's not doing it right. I need them to go faster. I need them to do this. And this is partly what we're talking about with that perfection leading to flaws in our training. Because if we strive to make the dog that doesn't hunt like that try and hunt like that, we're likely to start disrupting its natural pattern and start introducing errors, and it gets confused and it gets frustrated. And then you might see other things start to creep in. Claire?
Was a really nice example, Jem. And another example is play, and how one dog plays with its handler won't look how another dog plays with its handler. Different play styles. And so sometimes you get handlers feel despondent because they're watching someone else play with their dog over there, and the dog's getting really super excited and whizzing around with the handler. And the other dog is more holding on to the toy and freezing and staring, and very little motion and movement happening. So they say, well, he's just not really playing. But maybe that's just the style of how that dog plays. So it's with the hunting, with the play, with the retrieving. Every dog will have its own unique style. So I think this is exactly it. When you are watching things or watching other people and comparing what your dog does, that's not your dog. It's not your dog's personality or style. So I think it's recognizing that and sort of them realizing, well, actually, is my dog getting that job done? And is my dog getting that job done well? It might look different, but he's getting it done.
I think it's worth having this discussion, and I know what you're all going to say, but is there such thing as a flawless working dog? If we get to 4-year-old, should we expect this flawless dog?
I think at the end of the day, you can train your dog to within an inch of its life, and it is never going to be the robot perfect dog. Every dog is going to have a moment where it goes, actually, I'd rather do this. And it has a little bit of a blip, or it gets confused in a situation, or something in the environment happens that we haven't fully prepared our dog for. They're not robots. They have got their minds of their own, and they will always have moments where it doesn't go entirely to plan. But that's just dogs, and that's just dog training.
That, and also I know plenty of people that compete with their retrievers at field trials, and the dogs do really well, and one day they rock up to a field trial and the dog runs in on the first run, and it hasn't done that for years or something like that. And so, yeah, I don't think any dog is perfect. And when I look at my own dogs and their qualities that I love and their qualities that maybe I don't love so much, none of them are perfect. They all have their quirks. And if I look about, we've just come out of the shoot season. At the end of last shoot season, the things I had to fix at the end were very different to the things I've got to fix at the end of this shoot season. So I made a mental note at the end of the last shoot season that during the shoot season with Rose, I was going to not forget her straight lines in training in between shoot days. And I was going to still work on this and still work on that. And I did all of that. And I haven't lost my straight lines. Whereas last shoot season, at the end of the shoot season, I had no straight lines left. Now this year, I haven't lost my straight line, but my steadiness has gone kaput because of the amount of runners that she's picked. And I had it for more than 3/4 of the season, and then the last couple of days, yeah. And I'm not saying like she was really unsteady and running all the time, but she wasn't reliable on her steadiness. I think your dogs aren't perfect, and depending on what you're doing with them, and if you're working them, and what you're training on, stuff's going to come up, and they are dogs, they're not robots.
And I think it's really important to remember that we're not perfect as well. On a day-to-day basis, we change massively on how we interact with our dogs. Some days we are full of drive and motivation, and we're like, I'm going to get out, I'm going to do this, I'm going to make sure I set this up right. Other days we're probably just not on it as much, and we might not give the command in the same way, or our body language is totally different. And I think it's really important that we need to remember that we're not perfect either. So it's unfair to think that our dog should be perfect. Sam?
Exactly that. And I think Claire tied in quite nicely with a point that you said before, Jem, in that she made a mental note at the end of last season what needed working on, but then the other variables changed. There were more runners to pick this season. So maybe that wasn't an issue the previous season, but that's the issue that's brought up the problems this season. So bringing into account that humans aren't perfect, dogs aren't robots, and you can't control absolutely everything in every environment, you cannot expect there to be absolute perfection everywhere you turn.
The thing is, I think when we're striving for perfection, it literally does make it so much more stressful, doesn't it? Because when Dad trained me, I use the word trained loosely, he just said basically do what I do. It was so stressful because he was training for trialing. He was very quick to correct an error. And I think if you've got somebody who's trains that style, then they're going to be very quick to not have a go at you as a handler, but they're going to be like, sort that out. It's going to be very fast. There's going to be no room for error, because if you're going to compete, you don't want the errors. And I think that became really stressful for me. If my dog like literally looked the wrong way, I would be on my dog. And then now, 6 years later, I'm probably completely the other way. I'm probably a little bit like I should be on my dog. I'm far more chilled out. Probably I need to find the middle ground myself here. Does that make sense, Claire?
Yeah, it makes absolute complete sense. And I was having a really interesting conversation with two ladies that I was training today. And they both had very individual things they were working on with their dogs. And in some ways, their dogs are quite similar. And in other ways, their dogs are not similar at all. But both of them had two very unique individual issues that they were working on with their dogs. But although the issues from the outside, as they were telling me, seemed very unconnected, they were totally connected. So with one of them, the lab has a little bit of an issue with wanting to hunt on and look for something else when it's picked one thing and thinks there might be another out there, and also struggles with the stop whistle when it's hunting. Both things are completely connected. The other dog lacks a little bit of confidence on distance on blind retrieves, but equally has a little bit of an issue with her stop whistle. And because that handler had been working really hard on both of those things, those two things were basically like knocking heads. So she was working on the stop whistle, so the dog was becoming more responsive to the stop whistle, but in doing that, the dog was becoming stickier on the blind retrieve. So I had to sort of explain to her there are two different problems that are totally connected and creating one kind of solid issue. Your dog is sticky on the blinds because she thinks you're going to stop her. So she was like, oh, I hadn't even thought about that. So I said they need to be in separate training sessions. And then I switched it round and I said, but how important is that? You have a super biddable dog who really wants to please you. Your friend has quite a headstrong, hard hunting dog who doesn't want to do those things. And I said, so sometimes you've got to look at, and this is the comparison thing, isn't it? They were looking at each other's dogs and the differences in what they were doing and wanting a little bit of what each other had, and without realizing the benefits of some of what they had versus the pros. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that this sort of like aligns to something that you have all taught me, which is I've seen sometimes you guys make mistakes on purpose with the dog to teach her something else. And then I'm like, that's such a more chilled out way of doing things, where if I was so petrified of making a mistake, I couldn't see that what you're trying to tell me is helpful to my dog, then I would hold my dog back. For example, with Sam, when you told me to get Ella to jump up on me to deliver, like that's like a mistake. I don't really want her jumping up on me. That's not what you encourage a gun dog to do. But that one mistake corrected another behavior that was said, and then we could correct quite easily the jumping up on me.
Exactly that. And I think I've said probably on multiple occasions, sometimes you have to create a problem to fix a problem. The balance, if you like, is finding or creating a problem that's then not going to be a massive issue to fix, rather than creating a massive black hole that you've got to try and climb out of. But that also, I think it ties into the handler's learning style as well, and how they learn and their experience level. And that's not to say that a novice person can't train a novice dog, because that is totally untrue. You can. But a lot of people will take advice that's given or things that they've seen as absolute gospel. And that's where experience, or having an experienced person or trainer or friends to help you out, can help just break up the issue into, like Claire said, those little points, and say, okay, you see this as problem 1. I see this as problem A, B, and C. And it all is involved in problem 1. And it's just people that see a thing and go, that's gospel, that's absolutely how I have to do it, cannot then break it down or even see that actually it is just the dog's own unique style. It's almost their handwriting style, if you like, where they go, do you know what, this is the personality of the dog, that's how it does it. The end result is the same. And it's not like we've gone the whole way around the globe to get there. It's just taken a slightly different route to the dog next door. Jem?
Yeah, and I think when we don't have the ability to break down all those points, we end up putting a lot of pressure on ourselves to correct that one point. And then that one point becomes not just the little issue that it was, it becomes this massive thing. And the same with our dog. So I've been having to be mindful of pressure, both on myself and my young dog lately. I desperately want to get her out in tests and things this year. And as a result, I've probably ramped up the pressure too much on me and her. But she's not a dog that copes well with pressure, as many dogs don't. So I've had to adapt what I'm doing with her in order to cope with that pressure. And if I'd just been set on, I need her to have a really pretty out and back on a blind, then I know that pressure would have ultimately set her up to fail, and I'd have created bigger issues. So at the moment, our out and backs aren't necessarily pretty on a send out, but she goes in that direction, finds what she's supposed to find, brings it back. Again, delivery is not pretty. She doesn't sit, she doesn't wait with the hold. It comes to hand, and I'm accepting that, because I know that if I put pressure on me and her to make it perfect and pretty, it's going to ultimately ruin the whole thing. So yeah, pressure is a massive thing to bear in mind for you and your dog. And
Jem, you and I were actually talking about this last week when you were down, weren't we? And we were just discussing how pressure, there's two sorts of pressure. Not putting too much pressure on that you ruin something that's going quite well and you want it to evolve naturally, but equally putting enough pressure on that the dog learns how to cope with a bit of pressure and learns to be a really resilient dog that can handle stuff. But equally, you said, because you shared, obviously on the group, you shared that little video and you said all of that, but then you were very quick afterwards to say, yeah, but hang on, that doesn't mean I'm not working on those things individually, but I'm just not working on them in one set. And I thought that was really important, because when I work with reluctant retrievers, we are working on multiple parts of the retrieve. So there's the sitting at heel, there's the steadiness to the mark, or it wouldn't be steady with a reluctant retriever, but I'm just going through the fundamentals of a retrieve. The send out, the pick up, the return, the delivery, and then the coming back into the heel position. But just because you're working on the whole retrieve, when you're trying to build a reluctant retriever's drive, you're not going to worry about the steadiness or the delivery, because in that moment, the focus that you've got is building the dog's drive and desire to do the thing. But that doesn't mean you can't still work on the delivery and the steadiness as completely individual components, but you just wouldn't want to shove it all together because that would be too much pressure, as you just said, Jem. And when you put that pressure on, the dog will probably go, I don't like this game anymore. Retrieving is really dull. I don't want to do it. So it's looking at it like that. But I think all the time when you're fixing a problem, sometimes you just have to let something else go to get the result of fixing the problem. And sometimes just look and observe and be like, what do I really want from this? And what is my dog's capability on this?
So as well, right? Sometimes if you look, I always refer back to the horse world. I had a horse called Tara and she was such a schoolmaster. It was unbelievable. And she inflated my ego to believe I could ride better than I could. And I would go into shows and I would win and I would look amazing. And I thought I'd nailed it. And then when it's time for me to go up to the next height horse, which is unbelievable at my height, that I actually needed to do that. But when I needed to go up and I had a horse that actually needed to be ridden, I fell apart and I was like, stupid horse. It was just chaos. The horse was like throwing me off. I was just like, I just looked such a mess. And it wasn't even so much about how I looked. It just massively damaged my confidence because my confidence wasn't an actual truthful confidence. I thought I was better than it was. And then when I found out it wasn't, it was massively damaging to me. So do you think like for handlers and dogs where they've really come through the problems and they've learned to problem solve together, that it makes like this really strong, adaptable relationship where they both can face anything that's really thrown at them?
I think having that approach and having to work through it to get there is actually a really valuable part of dog ownership and dog training. But I think what you've just described there about the next height horse and feeling previously like you'd nailed it is very similar in the dog training world to crossing environments. A handler can genuinely believe, when they're right in parts, that their dog can do everything or they've taught their dog to do everything they need it to do in their back garden. But as soon as they go over the road into a field or into a woodland, or there's an added distraction of another dog, it falls apart. And that can be really soul destroying and it knocks their confidence. So it is, like you said, building that resilience, building that adaptability of being able to say, okay, you can do a retrieve at, if you have a big garden, say 100 yards in the garden where there's no distractions and the dog knows every square inch of it. But when I take it across the road into that field that's got more natural scent, more wildlife, I am going to adapt and I am going to make it easier. And I might not expect the perfectly polished sit and present delivery on top of making it a shorter retrieve. So whilst we know that it's perfect in that environment, we also know that we have to set the dog up to succeed and maybe have slightly less perfect in this environment over here.
It does sound like where I was just talking about how it hit my confidence. Do you know where you've got a bit of a, let's call it a flappy handler all over the place a little bit? That can do the same to a dog's confidence. So they are like all over the place, and then the dog's a little bit like, what's going on?
It can, and it's not always in terms of the owner's scared, so the dog's got to be scared. But sometimes the dog can just be sat there going, I don't really know what's going on. And because the owner is, to use your phrase, flappy handler, they're not giving clear and concise instructions to the dog. So it does have, a lot of the time, a knock-on detrimental effect. Sometimes, don't get me wrong, you get a dog that is so in tune with their owner or with their job that they go, I've got this. I know what you need of me, so I'm going to carry this for both of us. But I think that happens less often than the other way around, where the flappy handler means the dog is confused and therefore is less likely to succeed. Claire?
I totally agree with all of that. And I think it's just worth handlers considering. So a lot of people will say that your emotions go down the lead. And I think to a degree, that's quite a true statement. But I also think, like you just said, Sam, some dogs are just more resilient. They don't even really notice that kind of thing. And other dogs really do notice that kind of thing. When the handler is feeling stressed, nervous, anxious, they very often will do things differently to how they would do it normally with the dog when they didn't feel stressed or nervous or anxious. Obviously, there's a lot of science where they're going into what dogs feel, what dogs' emotions are, blah, blah, blah. But we can't just say to our dog, does my nerves make you feel nervous? It'd be so much easier if we could literally say that to our dog. But I think every dog is quite unique in this. And where we always say every dog is different and unique, I think some dogs are really tuned in to how their handler's feeling and are affected by that. But other dogs just seem to not be fazed by anything and probably would barely notice that their handler felt a bit off or a bit under the weather or stressed or anxious or nervous. So I think it's not as cut and dry as people like to say that sort of thing is, but I think it's something we should always consider for sure.
And I think as we continually and consistently breed them to be more in tune with us, for the dogs that show those traits, shall we say, something that is not hard-headed or self-employed, but something that's consistently aware of what's going on with us, it becomes more often that we see a dog that's affected by somebody's behavior, like somebody's feelings, isn't it?
I'm saying yes with my mute button on. Yes, Joe. It 100% is. It really is. And I think we should never say it's totally the case. I think it is very dependent. But I think you are right. We're seeing dogs get softer and softer. And we're seeing more dogs that struggle with just not as resilient about life, more affected by life. So I think we have to consider these things when we're training the dogs. And then if you've got a dog that's not as resilient and you're striving for that perfection and you're putting this pressure on the dog, it's just a bit of a vicious circle.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that actually as humans we have to take accountability for, because let's face it, we choose the breeding. If we want to breed our female dog, then we pick the stud dogs to go with it. And if we are breeding for the traits of being more in tune with their handlers and having a more biddable personality, all that sort of stuff, then we do have to take accountability and make sure that our training styles are adapted for it. What Claire was saying about being on dogs feeling about you being under the weather there, I remember a couple of years ago when I dislocated my knee, I had one dog in particular that wouldn't leave me alone. They picked up on the fact that I was slower, I was walking differently, and I was probably going, ow, every now and then. And they would just literally attach to me and go, what's wrong, Mum? How can I help? What's different? And then I had another one that basically looked at me and went, hurry up, woman, come on, what's taking you so long? And I think that kind of, again, it shows through in their personalities and their breeding and how affected they are by how we are. And going back to what I was saying about us taking accountability, it wouldn't surprise me at all if at some point the breeding gets changed again. And instead of trying to get softer dogs, we then try and get more hard-headed dogs again. And things normally do a full circle eventually. And I've no doubt that it will be a bit like a wave. We'll have a period of softer dogs and then a period of more hard-headed dogs and then a period of softer dogs again, where we try and find that balance in the middle.
We talk all the time in our group and our members about this. It's not even a concept, it's a methodology. Progress over perfection. Progress every day, little wins. And if I look in the morning when I go online and I scroll through our members lounge and I see people saying, oh, I've just got to share this. My dog did this. And they might seem little things to some people, or they might seem huge things to people. The people who fought a little bit harder to get that, I think, are always more pleased with themselves and the dog because they know how hard they've battled to get there. So I think we need to work away from like the dog needs to be perfect to I need to progress with the dog, which is a completely different mindset, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a completely different mindset. And what you said right at the beginning of that sentence, Joe, was that saying practice makes perfect isn't true. Practice makes permanent, and that's not necessarily in a good way. So if you're practicing something badly, then you're practicing a bad thing and that becomes the permanent behavior until you correct that, obviously. So it's not about practice making perfect. It's about seeing that growth and those little small improvements and acknowledging the dog when they make improvements, acknowledging the dog for effort. I think so often when people are trying to get from A to Z and aren't thinking about C, D, E, F and all the other letters of the alphabet, handlers forget to acknowledge and reward effort on that journey. And so they are just striving for that end result, and they forget to acknowledge and reward the effort. And it's the effort and the baby steps during that effort that will get you the end result.
Okay, so to wrap up this podcast, what do we think is the key takeaway of this? Is it about this different attitude on our side as we progress? Or are we saying the mistakes are what makes the dog?
Yeah, I think in everyone's journey, you've got to make mistakes to learn, and we all do, and our dogs do. And we're not even saying don't strive for perfection, because you've got to have goals to head towards. But what we're saying is, in trying to achieve that perfection, don't get solely fixated on it. Celebrate the little wins and achievements that your dog makes. Break down things into easy, manageable chunks. Go at your dog's pace and your pace. Don't get distracted by everyone else and what they're doing with their dogs, because everyone and their dog is different. Have goals, strive for that perfection, but don't ruin good in pursuit of that perfection.
Exactly that. And I think it's, whilst you're, like Jem said, striving for that perfection, remember that your and your dog's perfection isn't going to be the same as the next person and their dog's perfection. In being too set in stone in absolutely what your dog needs to look like or what that behavior needs to look like, you can sometimes do more damage than good. You can take away their personality or take away their unique handwriting, for want of a better description, and end up fighting against them because you're trying to make them into something that they're not. So absolutely have your goals, but definitely celebrate the little wins along the way, and make sure that your goals are unique to you and your dog rather than Joe Bloggs down the road.
Yes, absolutely. Have those goals. Strive for your success, for your goals, to get where you want to get. But don't forget to praise your dog and reward your dog for effort en route. And that effort might not look perfect and it might not look polished, but it's effort and it's progress. And do be prepared sometimes to let something go temporarily in order to fix something else. So it might be that you have to let one other thing go slightly, but that doesn't mean you're letting go of it forever. You're just letting go of it temporarily while you fix something or work on something else.
Fabulous. Thank you as always, ladies. Let's just all remember, perfection isn't what makes a great gun dog. It is literally the journey you're going to have with them. Remember that every time you have a mistake, you have a training and a learning opportunity, and that's something that you really want to enjoy being part of as well, because it's going to help you and your dog move forward. So next time it doesn't go to plan, take a deep breath. Very important. I think I'm going to learn from this and have a go at solving the problem you face. If you solve the problem, make sure to join in with one of our Ask Us Anything coaching sessions, where these three wonderful ladies will help you to put it all right. Thank you all, ladies, for joining me for another amazing podcast. I hope everybody's enjoying and getting used to the fortnightly sessions. It is a little bit different, but it's definitely allowing us to spend more time working on things with our members, which is absolutely important to us. Please subscribe, please review, please let us know what you think. Please send us some questions you may want answering. And if the question is great, we will look at it and make it into a podcast episode in itself. Make sure to share your stories with us, and let's celebrate our amazing dogs. Speak to you all next time.